Hello, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to Matthew Jacques, the Partnership Director for Zigzag Global. Thank you for joining us today, Matthew.
Thanks for having me, Dave. It's really good to be here.
Absolute pleasure. So can you give us an overview of your business, please, and its position in the supply chain cycle?
Sure. I mean, our business at the highest level works in the part of the supply chain called reverse logistics, right? And actually just before this call, I was like looking it up and it didn't really exist as a kind of written down concept until 1999, where there was a book called Going Backwards was published. And that kind of crystallized the whole concept of reverse logistics, which at the end of the day is the recovery of items that have been previously delivered, but for a whole host of uses, right? So maybe that is the retrieval of medical samples, the recycling for retrieval for recycling, product recalls, items back for trade-in, items back for repair, which will increase as the insistence that manufacturers' goods can now be repaired will grow through legislation. And ultimately, in the area where we kind of sit is e-commerce returns. So the returns of undelivered or unwanted e-commerce purchases, both nationally and internationally. And that can be at a B2B level, maybe in bulk, or also at a B2C level, which we as individual consumers do a lot, right? You buy something, it isn't quite right, you send it back.
Okay, no, thank you. And you know, within that, you know, with, let's say I purchased something in France or Germany, do you offer other services where it may not be practical to bring it back, and you may look to, you know, repackage it and resell it? Do you get involved in that as well?
Yeah. So essentially, to narrow down onto the sort of e-commerce return space, our place in the sector is fourfold, right? What we do is we create a branded destination, an online environment for an end consumer to visit, interact with the order they've placed with the merchant for the purposes of making a return, but also more prevalent these days is the purposes of making an exchange as well. So saving a sale is one of the things that's also kind of grown in importance. Secondly, it's the ability to curate that journey on behalf of the merchant, right? Depending on their strategy in the countries that they deliver. That might be how long you've got to return an item. Yeah, maybe longer at Christmas or, you know, after Black Friday, shorter at other times. Your right to return that item or not after that point, whether returns are free or paid, which is a huge shift in e-commerce trends over the last 2 years. You know, I think Which published a report yesterday about the number of merchants that now charge you in some way, shape or form for returns. Then you've got access to the best-in-class carrier in the country that you're in, right? And, you know, over the last sort of 10 years, that is certainly a choice of a Pudo, a Locker, and still Post, right? Post is still relevant in this sector, but customers want choice and convenience when they come to return an item. And then finally, it's a network of warehouses which can consolidate those returns in the country in which they originated. Yeah, and it's at that point where decisions like return or remain can be made. Yeah, so whilst it sounds like a really ideal concept, you know, the actual ideal concept actually is one of the founding concepts of our business, that if you ship something to another country, why bring it all the way back when you can refulfill it in that country and that sort of thing. Actually, retailers are still struggling to kind of get around that concept of the stock being distributed so widely, and also with sales cycles so short, sometimes even in the country it's been delivered, it actually has run out of shelf life, right? It's out of fashion, it's out of trend, it just needs to be discounted. So instead of kind of pure refulfillment of returns in whatever country they're delivered, what we're seeing is different disposition methods. So, you know, can you get it listed on a marketplace in that country, you know, get it resold that way? And actually, we're also seeing the use of data where the merchants are trying to make the right choice about an item the very first time it's returned. So actually, you know, if you think the traditional cycle is it goes out, it comes back, it goes out, it comes back. I started my career in the catalogue business, and after 8 weeks, when a new catalogue had been launched, most of the stock that went out had already been returned at least once or twice. But now they're saying, actually, I don't want to shoulder that cost all in one go because my margin's gone the first time that stuff comes back. So actually, what can I do with it when a customer in Germany wants to return an item that I've shipped from the UK, for example? And that the resale market, the direct to a marketplace for resale is probably the more prevalent model at the moment, as opposed to holding it in the country and then selling it back on the merchant's website, because it's slightly more straightforward to do, I think.
No, thank you. And you sort of brought me on to, another question I had is that the return sector is a relatively new sector. Do you see it continue to grow and possibly diversifying, which is almost something you've already hinted at, into other areas, that work and add to this, improve the service offerings to the consumers like ourselves through your partners? Yeah,
absolutely. So if you think how the returns sector started in a B2C sort of way, you often got a label in a box, right? And if you wanted to return it, you put that label on and then you kind of dropped it off, right? Over the last kind of 4 years, online returns platforms and journeys have kind of got rid of that. And if you think the savings that merchants would have made when they actually took all of that paperwork out of every outbound parcel. So, very much both from a sustainability and a cost point of view, there's been a transition to digital and online returns, right? However, one of the phrases that we have internally is that issuing a label is no longer enough, right? It has to form part of what's now kind of really loosely termed the post-purchase ecosystem, right? And essentially, that is about keeping customers happy, keeping merchants healthy and solvent, and facilitating repurchase. So from just putting a label in a box, it now stretches to a very curated returns journey with a choice of convenient returns and carrier options for the customer. Different ways of saving the sale through different methods of refunds and that sort of thing. And we've already talked about routes to resale and that sort of stuff. But also the ability now to harness the data that whole reverse logistics piece in e-com and the use of online platforms spins off. So what we're now seeing is that merchants are segmenting their customers by their returns behavior in the same way that they would segment them as a purchaser, right? And there's been several stories in the press of merchants actually banning customers because of their returns behavior, right? And that wouldn't have been possible without the extension of the post-purchase ecosystem to include all this data. And we're going to see so much more of that, right? You are going to maybe not get a free return if your purchase behavior, returns behavior fits in a certain criteria. Maybe you buy everything on sale, send most of it back, right? Or if you're a good full price paying customer, you'll probably get a free return, right? You'll get a returns journey. And, that may even vary depending on the country you're in as well. So one of the big things when we've always asked customers, and we've asked customers this question over the last kind of 10, 15 years, what's the most important thing to you to make you shop with a merchant, right? It's always generally, fast free delivery and free returns, right? And that statistic hasn't really changed. It's like 75, 80% of customers have said, give me a free return. It really helps. However, of course, returns aren't free, right? They cost money. They cost money in time, transport, people, space, right? Returns take up a lot of space in very valuable warehousing facilities that could be used for outbound fulfillment, right? So all of these things have led, and the spin-off of the data have led merchants to take the counterintuitive step, because it's not what their customers are telling them, to start charging for returns, right? And that has been a big thing over the last 18 months in terms of the introduction of paid returns in some way, shape or form. So literally from going a label in a box to a digital journey to save the sale features like exchanges and refunds to post-purchase data and communication, the whole kind of reverse logistics space as far as B2C e-commerce is concerned has stretched out into much more than just an original move stuff from A to B journey.
No, it's good. And like you say, as we all know, in the logistics world, nothing is free. Space isn't free, transport's not free, holding stock is not free because it's using facilities. So no, that's really, really good. What do you see as the current challenges in the marketplace? for your business and every business, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, just focusing down to the say the B2C e-commerce return space, right, which is our subset of reverse logistics. I think there's a real suppressed international demand at the moment. I think a lot of UK merchants stopped trading cross-border, particularly with the EU after Brexit, and a lot of them just haven't picked it back up again. Right? The challenge of being able to simply negotiate cross-border trade to the EU is sometimes one that the retailers don't want to face, but are going to have to look into it again to continue to grow their businesses. Making that less complicated, both on the outbound journey, but also on the return as well, right? So cross-border returns are just as tricky as cross-border deliveries, and have to follow, customs processes and that sort of thing. And a lot of customs authorities still really haven't got their heads around B2C e-commerce returns cross-border. So that poses a challenge all the time. It imposes a huge amount of complexity, which is making merchants shy away, which I think is actually dampening demand of the e-commerce sector as a whole, and therefore limiting the number of outbound parcels that logistics providers have got to ship, right? So there's a challenge in that. And then the other challenge, I think, is the rise of the direct from China merchant, right? Great news for the outbound delivery industry, and those Chinese merchants now make up a significant proportion of the revenues and volumes of most of the carriers in the UK. But the stuff is at such a price point, and the policy of customer acquisition is so strong that returns don't really feature in their model. Often they just let you keep it, right? And do it that way. So until there are some changes about that, the return sector of what is now a big chunk of UK e-commerce, isn't that strong with those merchants at this moment in time. But they will have to raise. They'll want to move into higher price items eventually. It's not just light bulbs and USB cables. And to do it, to have the confidence of being able to buy a higher priced item from a merchant like that, you need to be able to check the returns policy and be comfortable with it, which 70% of customers do before they buy. So they're the kind of two main kind of challenges that I think are either suppressing demand, or there's not the demand there at the moment because of the model of the retailer.
No, thank you. And also, when you talk about international shipping, you've got obviously you've got the duties and taxes and all of that bits and bobs. And also when you have returns, you've got the other, challenges with duties and taxes. And ironically, I was talking to someone yesterday who was talking about if you do it right, you can reclaim those duties and taxes, which is for the e-commerce companies, a big opportunity, and can go straight to their bottom line.
Huge opportunity, and a huge opportunity for us. So we're actually partnering with companies that can bring one half of the jigsaw, and then we can bring the other half of the jigsaw, particularly for the purposes of duty reclaim, right? So we see merchants who just literally refund the duties and taxes when an item's returned, and then don't have a process for reclaiming it. We see merchants who sometimes even limit how much their international customers can buy, so that they don't fall into a duty and taxes threshold.
That's right,
which is trade limiting at that point. And the actual processes for presenting claims is really quite. It's not made easy, right? Governments don't want to give money back, but what's going to happen? And you've already seen this. You've seen this in Turkey recently. You've seen it in Brazil. South Africa have done the same as well. Is going to be this change to the de minimis threshold, right? The more and more cross-border e-com in particular will fall under a duty and taxes burden. There'll be duties on that side if they lower the value of the goods before when duties are applied, and therefore merchants are going to have to face into how they deal with that problem, right? They're going to be looking for systems and partners and providers that can provide all of the data to prove that, one, the item was delivered, and secondly, it's been returned. One of the things that the customs authorities, HMRC, are really quite good, actually. They understand it. What we see in Europe is that some of the customs authorities can't get their head around the fact that the item can go out. Say you've got the parcel goes out, it's got 3 items in it and it's valued at X. But when actually it comes back, it might only have 1 in it because someone's kept the other 2, right? So it's actually changed in value throughout its journey. And that's quite a hard concept to kind of get around. So if that de minimis changes, then we see an explosion in demand for duty drawback, and also a real customer education piece as well about why, the prices of their goods have changed. And it'll probably happen in the US as well. It's starting to be discussed in the US, which traditionally has had a very, very high duty threshold.
No, thank you. And because the next question was going to be, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for your sector in the next sort of 3 to 5 years? I imagine that's part of it.
That is a very big one. Yeah, absolutely. I think having the data from a return leg of a journey to make duty drawback claims, we believe is going to be fundamental to cross-border commerce. Other opportunities are the amount of data that gets spun off, which then can drive more sustainable and more economic decisions for merchants. Right? So, I've talked about segmenting customers from returns behavior, but segmenting products by their returns behavior. But then also, the overlay to the circular economy, the overlay for repair, trading, asset recovery, precious metal reclamation, and less waste to landfill, right? One of the core tenets of our business is that, we want to make returns more sustainable. We want them to go to a place where they are resold or reused or recycled or donated. And I certainly see, the extended producer liability legislation in the EU, where you've got to take, as a producer, you've got to take more responsibility over the supply chain of what happens, and consumer demand for more sustainable options and choices from their merchants. The ability to recycle it at the end of its life, the ability to have it easily repaired, or the ability to trade it in for the next model, knowing that something good's going to happen to it afterwards, right? All of that, as opposed to it going to landfill.
Fantastic. And what do you see as the biggest threats for your sector in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think across all of logistics, talent, labour shortages is key, particularly in all areas. For us, it's a little bit in terms of under the roof labour shortages, but it's also the deep technical specialism that both the logistics sector and reverse logistics in particular kind of demands, right? You're talking about a process that has a customer journey, a carrier integration, a WMS feature, and a logistics component. And actually, you know from the industry, good carrier managers are hard to find, and good technical integrators are even harder to find, right? It's they're the kind of key roles that will drive the next level of evolution in this process. We do see some emergence of AI in certain areas, and we're working with a couple of exciting firms who are applying AI into what were quite manual, time-consuming, repetitive kind of tasks and analysis. But I think there's a lot more to kind of go on that. So I don't think it's any different to the logistics sector as a whole in terms of talent, and particularly technical talent.
No, definitely. Okay. And what are people in the sector not talking about that perhaps they should be?
I think I'll come back to that. Changes in de minimis. There's murmurs, but it's a bit like no one's kind of really just gone, oh, hold on a minute. It's going to affect everything from the customer who clicks to the international journey of that parcel. More and more stuff's going to fall under duty and taxes, where perhaps merchants have not really had to consider that at this time, and also therefore, if the customer is still getting a full refund when they return the item, who's going to claim back the duties and taxes that ultimately the customer's paid in the first place? You've got to transfer the representation to then go and do it, and suddenly starts to become very, very more complicated at a lower average order value, right? So, we're seeing it happen in other countries, but when you ask the question, like in Brazil, where they called it the blouse tax, they've introduced a thing called a blouse tax, which is cross-border e-commerce. They lowered the rates incredibly low, but they haven't put any process in at all to reclaim the duties and taxes you pay as a consumer should you want to return the item, right? So, I think that will be the same. The de minimis will change, but then there will be scrabbling around for a process in the background to reclaim those duties and taxes. So we're working very hard to be ahead of the curve on that.
Oh, thank you. And obviously part of what you do is part of the green transition, but how do you see the green transition and everyone moving towards it impacting your sector?
Well, it's always interested in the because it still ultimately relies on lots of diesel-powered vehicles driving millions of miles, right? And that is changing, as they move to electric fleets, but predominantly it's not. And it's also growing, right? The sector is growing, the miles driven are growing. So we're still actually fueling that demand rather than reducing it. I think what will happen is this sort of local optimization, so that stuff does not move as far as it does at the moment, right? The traditional model is still very much, I send it out, it goes to wherever it needs to go. If you don't want it and return it, it goes all the way back again to be resold, right? And we touched on this at the start about, can you resell stuff in the market? You absolutely can, but fewer retailers are choosing to do it now. And I think that will probably be the biggest impact in the sustainability credentials of the actual logistics process of reverse logistics itself. But ultimately, the use of reverse logistics to repair, recycle, donate, repatriate is going to be the biggest thing that boosts the sustainability credentials of this part of the industry. I think the fact that the next stop is not landfill. The next stop is somebody who can resell it, reuse it, repurpose it. And, more and more brands want that as part of their offer. They want to be able to sell pre-loved. They want to be able to take stuff back. So, I think that's how reverse logistics is helping the sustainability credential of commerce as a whole, right?
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And what developments in the sector have surprised you most in your career?
I think I'd come back again to probably the growth of the Pudo, and in such a short period of time, with a bit of pandemic assistance, we've embraced lockers, we've embraced drop-off points, we've embraced over-the-counter options, fueled initially by returns, right? Returns is a very straightforward transaction to do in a Pudo, and merchants have pushed them further. So, the fact that is now starting to catch on in the States, which have clinically rejected kind of Pudo all the way through, whereas us Europeans adopted lockers far earlier, particularly in Germany and Poland. But you can now see it in the States as well. So the fact that Pudo is continuing to gather popularity in markets where I never thought it would take off is quite interesting.
Good. So good. That's really good. So, and the final question I'm sort of asking everyone is, if you could speak to the Prime Minister, then what would you ask them to do to assist your business to grow and flourish?
I think the simplification of cross-border trade has to be the one, right? I think the suppressed demand from merchants and e-commerce that could give the industry a lot more volume and a lot more opportunity if those obstacles were taken out of the way and merchants had the confidence to sell internationally, simplistically. And then just as a supplemental, whether we could actually get 38-meter articulated trailers on arterial routes in this country, just as I've introduced in Denmark, and whether we could get the legislation to get those number of vehicle trips, which were still predominantly diesel fueled, off the road. I think that might be a little bit of an outlier. I'll stick to international trade simplification first, but other countries are now adopting much longer articulated vehicles and seeing the benefits in emissions reduction as a result. So that would be number 2. You got to ask him 2 questions, right? If you got a chance.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not, this is about conversations. That's what it's about. So I just want to say thank you, Matthew, for your great overview of your sector and what you do, and paints a really good picture of the whole logistics world and the challenges and changes of it as we go through. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Thanks a lot.